Keller had always found a rare kind of stillness in the water. It was the only place where the noise in his head dimmed, where breath and time aligned into something slower, quieter, more bearable. Years of diving along the Adriatic coast had shown him rusted shipwrecks, forests of coral, and old anchors encrusted with salt and time. But Ben wasn't in it for the treasure. The sea, with all its pressure and silence, gave him something the surface could not: peace. So when an old fisherman at the Puglia marina told him about a strange structure beneath the waves, something that looked like part of a house, Ben didn't laugh like the others. He listened. He filed it away, quietly curious. After all, who would build a house under the sea? A few days later, in early September, he launched his small boat from a quiet cove just off the Puglian coast. The conditions were perfect: calm seas, bright sun, and visibility forecasted to be good. Equipped with his usual diving gear, an underwater camera, and a quiet sense of purpose, Ben dropped anchor a few hundred meters offshore and took a slow breath before sliding into the water. The first descent was familiar: the blur of darting fish, refracted sunlight dancing in bands across the sea floor. At around 20 meters down, however, the water cleared, and that's when he saw it. Not a reef, not a shipwreck. Something rectangular, geometric, jutting up from the seabed like a piece of the world had broken off and sunken whole. His heart quickened as he swam closer. What he found startled him: a stone wall, smooth, clearly man-carved, connected to another, forming a solid corner. This was architecture, not nature. The stone had an olive gray hue, overgrown in places with barnacles and ribbons of green algae. He moved along its edge, tracing its outline. Then he saw the arched doorway, half intact, leading into shadow. For a moment he hovered, staring into the dark, half expecting some creature to emerge. But nothing did. The sea was calm here, almost reverent. He surfaced after about 40 minutes, pulled off his mask, and sat on the edge of his boat, eyes fixed on the water. This wasn't something ancient. The structure was too intact, too deliberate. Something was off. The next morning he returned with better tools: a sonar scanner, measuring tape, and markers. Over a series of dives, Ben mapped out the layout. The building was modest in scale, roughly the size of a small cottage. But the proportions were precise: rectangular base, inner walls, narrow stair-like formations. Inside, the structure was hollow, roofless, though it was unclear if it had ever had one. There were no artifacts, no relics of habitation, no pottery, no tools. But the detail was undeniable. Etched lines in the stone, thin ledges carved with intent, a sunken central floor that might have once held furniture or instruments. He had never seen anything like it. He sent a series of photos to a historian he knew in Bari. Her response came within hours. It wasn't Roman, not Byzantine, not consistent with any known ruins in the region. She was intrigued, but stumped. That only deepened the mystery. Could it be a personal project? An art installation? A Cold War relic? The more he dove, the more questions he found. Then, one morning, he noticed something peculiar embedded in the floor: a rectangular plate, partially hidden beneath a thin blanket of sand. It was metal, old and slightly corroded. Carefully, he cleared it. There were finger grooves, indentations, a hatch. He tried lifting it, but it wouldn't budge. It was sealed tight, untouched for decades. He logged the find and decided to come back better equipped. That night, he called Luca, an old friend, an engineer and part-time diver. 2 days later, they returned with tools, pry bars, saws, underwater epoxy. The work was slow, difficult, but eventually the hatch gave way with a low metallic groan. Beneath it was a hollow chamber, and inside a sealed box. They brought it carefully to the surface. After drying it, Ben opened the latch. Inside were papers, old, well-preserved, stored in waterproof sleeves. Some pages bore engineering diagrams, others handwritten notes. One document was labeled Project Vitrum, Phase 2 Report, 1972. Ben sat frozen. This wasn't an ancient structure at all. It was modern. The documents told a story, one that had been sealed away beneath the waves for decades. Project Vitrum had been a collaboration between marine researchers and experimental architects from a Milanese institute. The idea wasn't survival, it wasn't colonization, it was therapy, an experiment in mental health. The structure was a psychological lab, designed to house volunteers in controlled isolation beneath the sea. Researchers studied their stress levels, their mood shifts, the effects of pressure and silence on the human psyche. Volunteers had stayed in the structure for hours, sometimes overnight, journaling their thoughts, meditating, submitting to observation. The goal had been to explore the therapeutic effects of the ocean's stillness. Ben was stunned. It explained everything. The deliberate construction, the lack of everyday items, the metal hatch. This wasn't a home or temple. It was a prototype, a sanctuary, a human experiment in peace. He contacted the now-retired institute. At first skeptical, they confirmed the project's existence. One of the researchers emailed him. "We never thought anyone would find it again." The building had been forgotten, not because it failed, but because it succeeded too quietly for the world to notice. 2 weeks later, Ben found himself in Genoa, sitting across from Professor Olivia Mancini, who had worked on Project Vitrum as a field psychologist in her 20s. Her apartment was modest, sunlit, and filled with books. When he showed her the photos, her eyes filled with tears. "I can't believe it's still there," she whispered. "We called it the House of Stillness." She told him about the months they spent testing the structure, lowering into its chambers, how the environment changed people. "It was like being inside a breath that never ends," she said. "Even short exposure reduced anxiety," she explained. Volunteers emerged calmer, less reactive. But in the 1970s, funding something intangible, something like emotional peace, was hard. The ministry wanted quantifiable outcomes, charts, not feelings. Eventually, the project was shelved, the site sealed, and left to the tides. She opened an old folder and handed him a page, a short essay written in pen. Ben recognized the handwriting from one of the waterproof notes. Olivia smiled softly. "That was me," she said. "On my final descent, I stayed inside for an hour, alone. I wasn't supposed to write about it personally, but I did. It changed something in me. The world was loud again when I came up, but I wasn't afraid of it anymore." Ben didn't say much. He didn't need to. He returned to the dive site a few days later. By now, authorities had given the site temporary protection, and plans were forming to preserve it, not as a tourist attraction, but as a case study in architecture, therapy, and forgotten ideas. It wasn't a ruin. It was a whisper left behind. On his final dive before the season changed, Ben entered the structure one last time. He floated through the doorway, placed his hand on the cold, carved wall, and sat where Olivia once had. The sea moved around him in slow rhythms, unhurried. For a while, he thought of nothing. Then, everything. The people he missed, the weight he carried, the man he used to be. Slowly, his chest eased. He exhaled long and deep. The building had listened, and in its silence it had kept a secret, not of science or strategy, but of stillness, until someone was ready to understand it.